Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is week one of our School District 46 series, Parenting Through Difficult Times. I'm Sarah Joseph, and I help people feel empowered by providing them tools that strengthen relationships and deepen connection. This week, we're talking about kids nowadays and why parenting is so hard. Just a little introduction about myself for those of you who I haven't met before. I'm Sarah and I have two kids. I'm a mom of two. They are 8 and 11, almost 9 and 11. And we do live on the Sunshine Coast. We are part of the School District 46, and I actually am an employee now of School District 46. I'm a family navigator for the early years team. And I also have a master's in social work with postgraduate training in trauma. I'm working with kids with trauma. And I have been teaching positive discipline and working with families for over 10 years and facilitating trainings for teachers and counselors and other professionals on the coast for the last 5 years. So that's a bit about me. Hopefully we'll get to know each other throughout this 6-week series. And as I mentioned before I started the recording, at the end we'll have time for the people who have joined me live for questions and for discussion. So please stick around for that. All right, let's jump into tonight's topic. I thought, for parenting during difficult times, it might be a good topic to start with, just talking about how for most of us, parenting is way harder than we expected without a pandemic to deal with. And even those of us who are trained as teachers or psychologists, social workers, childcare providers, even we feel under-equipped when we're dealing with our own kids. And we'll talk next week. We're going to talk more about the brain. And I think one of the reasons that we feel under-equipped is simply because we don't have a lot of training as parents usually, unless you take classes like these or do a lot of reading or watching other videos. But also when we move into our, when we get triggered by our kids, when we move into feeling frustrated or upset with our kids, what happens is we kind of lose the access to the part of our brain where we hold those tools in place. So it becomes harder for us to access those tools even when we do have them. Again, we'll talk more about that next week, but I just thought that it was helpful for everyone to know that, I, as somebody who's been working with families for a long time and working with other people's children for a long time, I can say that I can handle just about anything other people's children do. But when it comes to my own kids, I do get triggered by them. And I do feel under-equipped and at times. And yeah, my reactions are much different. I once in counseling, I had a child who flicked paint at me on a brand new white shirt. And I totally handled it with grace and elegance. Didn't freak out at all. Had that been my own child though, I probably would have been really upset and angry. That's just an example of how things change. So in any case, I wanted to share with you some reasons why parenting is more difficult now, or just more difficult than maybe what we expected. And reason number one is the gap between our expectations and reality. And so you can see on this little graphic here that we have these expectations of how things are going to go, how talks with our kids are going to go, or how setting boundaries is going to go, or how getting them to do cooperate and help with chores around the house is going to go. And then there's reality, right? And all of that space between those expectations and reality is where frustration and disappointment and stress lives. So, this gap can be really debilitating to our efforts as parents. It can be really overwhelming, right? It can create a lot of unnecessary stress if we allow it to. One, I thought as we were talking about these reasons that maybe I could help give a remedy as well. So one of the remedies to this gap is to not lower your expectations, but bring the expectations and reality closer together, right? And one of the ways that we can do that is by understanding child development a little bit more. And I understand your children are adolescents and teens, so we can understand teen development more, and understanding how their brains work, what their what developmental stages they're going through, and they're still going through stages as they go through adolescence, just like they were going through developmental stages as they were little ones, right? A little less known for the adolescent years than the milestones that we were used to when they were 1 and 2 and 3, right? So when we understand understand our kids a bit better and the developmental milestones or stages that they're in, then we can set our expectations to what could really be reality, and that can really help lower our frustration and our stress. The other thing is to not set crazy expectations for ourselves either, right? For most of us, this is the first time that we're parenting a child who is at the age that they are, right? You've only been a parent for as long as your oldest child has been alive. And so you don't know what to expect, and you don't know what it's going to be like when your child is in grade 10 or 11 or 12, because they haven't been there before. You haven't been there before. So allowing yourself to have some space for growth and for discovery is really important, and not expecting that you're going to know everything or how to handle everything is really important. Okay. So reason number 2 that parenting is difficult is these unforeseen changes. And so, we can't always anticipate what's going to happen, and a lot of stuff happens that we can't control, especially with adolescents, because they are in such a place in their life where they need to step away and create more independence and take risks. We don't have a lot of control over it. And that can throw us off kilter, but it can also throw them off kilter. And our reactions to them stepping out can throw our relationships off kilter. And so, who foreseen a pandemic happening, right? Life is always going to be throwing us these curveballs, and if we can maybe be a bit more flexible, and again, allow ourselves grace to stumble, grace to be a bit shocked, right? And to feel out of control, to have those feelings of anxiousness and fear in us, right? And to just be able to sit with them a bit, and think about those things a little while, and to soothe ourselves before we respond or react to a situation can be really helpful, because those aren't normal reactions, right? When we're not expecting something, it's normal to feel a bit shocked. It's normal to feel out of control. It's normal to feel stressed or fearful, anxious. And so how can we normalize that for ourselves and not feel like there's something wrong with us or with our children or our relationships, and be able to soothe ourselves, give ourselves some self-care maybe, again, before trying to solve any of those problems. All right, number 3 is temperament. So I hope by now, as your child is hitting their teen years, you have figured out what type of temperament your child has and whether your child is like you or not like you. I have found that this is one of the biggest challenges for parents, is to figure out how their temperament matches with their child's temperament or doesn't match with their temperament, and how, when we have this out of balance temperament, when we're not the same as our child, it can be really, really challenging for us to understand our child's way of life, right? For instance, if you are an extrovert and your child is an introvert, you may have a really hard time understanding why they don't want to go and out and see friends, why they didn't want to be on Zoom during lockdown, right? And connecting with people, why they seem to isolate during that time. It could be really difficult for you to understand that. And then sometimes it turns into us as parents trying to push our kids to do things that's just outside of their comfort zone, or setting them up to fail, right? For instance, setting them up to be in activities that would require them to be more extroverted when they don't feel comfortable doing those things. And I can't think of another example right now, sorry. But I think you get my point, right? The other challenge is when our kids are so much like us. It can be very challenging because we sometimes feel that, we know, we understand, when really they're like us, but they're not us. And then, also sometimes what happens is things are going on for them that brings up our, experiences from our past that might trigger us, right? And so we might feel emotionally fired up by something that's going on for our child because it's bringing up stuff from our own childhood or our teen years, right? Like, for instance, if your child is being bullied and you were bullied as a child, then it might be bringing up all of those feelings for you. And yeah, sometimes we do feel like we know them so well, we think, especially if they're like us. We think that we know what's best and we know who they are and what they need. But again, they're not us. So we have to leave some space for them to show us who they are and what they need, and allow them to become their own individuals, which is challenging. Okay, so the remedy to this one would be to really understand your own temperament, right? What are your own temperamental traits? Are you an introvert, extrovert? Are you, how persistent are you? How sensitive are you? And then understanding your child's temperamental traits as well. And when we do this, we gain a better understanding of who they are and why they do the things that they do. And we get a better understanding of ourselves and why we do the things that we do. And then there's just this, we gain this ability to set ourselves and our children up for success instead of walking into situations where we're really set up to fail, right? Like, for instance, if you had a young child who couldn't sit still, taking the family to a movie theater for a 2-hour movie is going to spell disaster, right? If your child can't sit still. So that would be a disastrous family outing. However, if you understood that your child's temperament was to not be able to sit still, that they needed to move constantly, they're always bouncing off the walls, then maybe picking a family outing that was a little more in alignment with their temperament might be helpful and set them up for success so the whole family could enjoy the outing instead of having the one child who can't sit still through the movie and then one parent who has to end up leaving with that child because that child is making making it hard for anybody to concentrate, making too much noise, all that stuff. Okay, so reason number 4 is the exhaustion. Raise your hand if you're feeling tired. Right? Everybody I know is feeling exhausted. And, I think it's to be expected. I mean, we are living in a global pandemic, and that raises everybody's stress levels. Financial stress, the isolation, the work situations, the trying to decide about going back to school or not sending the kids to school, the second guessing our decisions, right? And then just the normal stuff, the normal family stuff, right? Which is also making decisions and then worrying whether we made the right decision. It's like managing everybody's schedules and coordinating transportation and snacks and gear and all the things, right? Keeping the house running, managing everybody's emotions. Like, as parents, we're doing all the things, and all the things are exhausting us. And, I'll talk more about this next week when we're talking about the brain, but when we are living through such amounts of stress, we end up having a smaller coping capacity for stress. So if you feel like you are exhausted and you feel like you are lacking patience or you're being triggered more easily these days, just know that that's normal. And you are not alone. So the remedy for this reason, for exhaustion, is really to take care of ourselves, right? Bring in self-care. And when we talk about self-care, so often people think we're talking about going to the spa or having a drink out with friends or, going golfing for the day, whatever it is that, you feel really rejuvenates you. However, self-care really needs to be done daily, and it needs to be done in small doses. So it needs to be things that are easy, that are quick, that don't take a lot of time, don't cost any money maybe, that you can really just sprinkle throughout your day. So, it might just be, like for me, drinking a hot cup of coffee in the morning is like something that really helps me feel good. So when I'm able to do that, it just kind of bolsters me at the start of my day, right? And then, some other things that I try to sprinkle throughout my day is like a couple moments of meditation. And so it doesn't have to be long, maybe just 5 or 10 minutes. Walking the dog, getting outside into nature, just reading a book, right? Just little things, maybe listening to music, dancing, singing, right? Playing the tunes in the car on the way to work. Little things, right? That you can just sprinkle throughout your day, that this helps you release stress and kind of fills you up, fills your bucket, makes you feel happy and a little bit less stressed. That is how we're going to keep refueling and to help us keep moving through this. All right, reason number 5, and this is a biggie: society has changed. So kids are different nowadays than when we were growing up, right? And what kids see around them has changed completely. The power over relationships are being replaced with more respectful relationships based on equality and dignity. Now, this is a big topic, and it deserves a little bit of time here. If we think back to when we were growing up, so, for most of us, that was like the 70s, 80s, right? We're growing up through the 90s maybe. But if we think back to what we saw when we were growing up and what our parents saw when they were growing up, what we experienced, it was based on power over relationships. So that means that somebody had power over you, right? And everywhere you looked in society, there were other people holding power over the people around you. So, for instance, you may have seen power over relationships at school, where the principal was the head of the school and rarely came out of their office. And when they did, it was to be like the head of the school for a gathering, right? And they were the disciplinary, right? And then there were the teachers and the secretary and the kids, and everybody kind of knew their place in the pecking order. And at home, we often had men over women, and then over children. And when we looked around outside, there was the bosses or owners, managers, and then workers, right? And we had whites over colors, and able bodies over disabled bodies, and heterosexual over homosexual. And all of these relationships were held in place through certain tools and strategies. And so if we take a look at this little graphic, we can see that the tools that were used to keep these structures of power in place were rules and laws and punishment, right? And if we think of how our parents kept us in place, it was often through the rules and fear, threats, punishment, shame, right? We were, when we look around, some of the other ways that these structures of power were kept are through traditions and institutions, and access to education or money, right? And we can see that things have been starting to change in our society, right? And if we look at women's rights, we can see that that's been going on for decades, and that women are gaining more rights, and that when children look at home now, they see that men and women are more equal in the home, and they both take on many of the tasks at home in the child rearing. And that's been a huge shift for men, right? The way that men had witnessed fathering had been more as providers, and not so much as child rearers or stay-at-home dads, right? Or emotionally available fathers. And we can see that, like, if we look down into the US and what's happening there, with all the racial stuff that's happening there, we can see that there's a big shift happening. And of course, we haven't come into, we have these power over structures, and we haven't come into alignment completely with these horizontal relationships. We're not there yet, but we're certainly moving in that direction. And kids these days, what they see around them makes them understand that those power over relationships aren't okay. And they've been taught throughout elementary school, throughout high school, throughout our society, and what they see on TV and social media, and through our relationships in our town and in our homes, is that these power over relationships are not okay, that they're damaging. And we've taught them that when they see these types of relationships, that they need to stand up to them, that they need to push back, that they need to speak out. And so what's happening now in homes is when kids are faced with this power over parenting style that we've had, where we're trying to control them with rules and shaming and blaming and threats and punishment, what happens is kids push back, right? They push back hard. And what I hear from parents is that children these days are disrespectful. They have no respect for adults. Adults tell me I would have never spoken to my parents that way, right? And that they have no regard for rules. And parents feel like like they don't know what to do. Like they can't get their kids to obey, and they don't know what to do. They feel like nothing's working. And what I want to tell you is that nothing's working. It's because we're using old strategies that basically our kids have been taught are not okay, right? That these types of relationships, these types of strategies are they're not okay. They're disrespectful. And so they're standing up for themselves, and it's us adults who need to adapt. We need to change the way that we show up, the way that we're in relationship, to something that is more respectful. So moving into horizontal relationships is going to be the key. And when we talk about horizontal relationships, what we're talking about is showing respect, being respectful, bringing integrity, maintaining people's dignity, having empathy, right? Seeing differences as assets, collaborating, problem solving together, cooperation, having that shared vision so that we can keep each other accountable and really create together. So what that looks like in parenting is finding a balance between kind and firm parenting, where we're still able to set limits and set boundaries, but we're doing it in a way that's different than how our parents did it, right? Instead of shutting down kids' emotions, not hearing from them, not inviting them into conversations, and just making up rules and then threatening to ground them or take privileges away when they don't follow through with what they're supposed to do. This is about, still holding them accountable to the agreements that they've made, but it's about making agreements instead of being the dictator, right? Instead of telling them what to do, we're sitting down and we're creating a shared vision of what is expected and getting their buy-in and their agreement, and then holding them accountable for that. And over the next few weeks, we'll talk more about how to do that. But what we see when we move into these horizontal relationships is that cooperation increases significantly, that everybody feels more connected, more engaged, a better sense of belonging and significance. So feeling loved, important, capable, encouraged, and everybody starts striving harder, because when we feel better, we do better. So we want to be part of our family community. We want to be part of our school community. We want to be part of the larger community, because we are included, because we feel like we're making a difference by being there. Yeah, and again, we'll talk more about that as the weeks go on. So that was the remedy. And now reason number 6 why parenting is so difficult nowadays is there's a global pandemic, right? And along with this global pandemic, we have also had so much change, so much loss, disappointment, so much stress, some isolation, and so much more, right? Things keep changing, and the uncertainty of what's to come is looming over many people, including our kids. And we've never had to parent through anything like this before, and hopefully we never will again. But as I mentioned earlier, because of all this stress, we do have reduced coping capacity. It is like, there's so many straws on the camel's back that we can't handle one more straw. We're going to break, right? And that's just, it's normal to feel like you have less patience, or like you can't cope with anything else at this point. And hopefully, as I said earlier, when we do some self-care, we might feel like we're releasing some of that stress off our back. We're putting down some of the heavy load that we've been carrying around. hopefully with the schools opening back up and our kids going back to school and getting into routine, that we might feel like we're able to put down some of that heavy load that we've been carrying. And it might bring on some normalcy and some more calm for us. In the meantime, while we're moving through this other new transition of back to school life, and back to activities and back to busyness, just remember to slow down and, take care of you and make time for downtime together as a family. All right. So every parent faces exhaustion, stress, confusion, isolation, and guilt. And I wanted to point this out because I think it's so important that we know that we're not alone in this, that we know that it's not just us, that there's not something wrong with me because I feel so stressed and exhausted. That there's not something wrong with the way that my relationship is with my child when I feel confused, or I feel like I feel guilty for not connecting in a way that feels more meaningful. That all of this is normal. And hopefully by connecting here over the next 6 weeks, we'll be able to normalize some of these feelings for each other and have discussions around how we feel about parenting right now, right? And some of the challenges that we're faced with. So my goal over the next 6 weeks is to really help you learn some new tools for your parenting toolbox that will help correct those power over relationships into more horizontal relationships, but also help our kids learn life skills while increasing our connection and reducing conflict, and really just helping us gain more cooperation at home. So I hope that you will join me for the next 5 weeks. We've got some good stuff coming up. Next week, we're going to talk about understanding the adolescent brain, and then connection and letting go, and why adolescents really do need us to be a safe home base for them, and they need to get out and be more independent and take those risks. We're also going to talk about recognizing mistakes as opportunities and finding that balance between kind and firm parenting, and then wrap it all up with talking more about parenting stress and self-care, and what we can do for us so that we show up as our best selves. All right. Well, we will be meeting every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. here on Zoom. And I hope to see you next week. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now so the people who are here live can join me for a discussion. And we will see you next week if you are watching the replay. Hopefully you can join us live. Thank you.